Hey friends, welcome back. Today I'm here with Roberto Escobar over in Queens, New York. Nice to connect with someone sort of in my time zone, makes scheduling easier. But he's here today to talk about his journey with long COVID. He had, unfortunately, a really quite long, hard journey with this that was looking quite tough and kind of hopeless for a while, but eventually did find what he needed to completely turn this around and fully get his health back and his life back. So I'm so excited, Roberto, to have you here today. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Raelan. Appreciate it.
So your story, one of the things about that really struck me is that it started for you before you even got sick, or at least your experiences leading up to that significantly impacted how you reacted to COVID when you got it. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I actually got sick. I actually got COVID December 2020, January 2021. And so before that, the pandemic kind of hit, especially in our town in New York, especially in Queens, New York. I'm actually a registered nurse, so I worked at a hospital. And when the pandemic hit, it was really traumatizing for a lot of the nurses and healthcare workers out here. And I actually didn't get COVID for a while. You know, it hit New York around March 2020. That was the trauma that kind of started everything. And I had no idea that this would affect, or even I was going to be into long COVID or any of that. But kind of getting that experience and being traumatized, dealing with patients. The hospitals were full of sick patients. We weren't used to seeing that amount of patients and the severity of sickness that these patients were going through. And a lot of patients were passing away, and it's not something that we were used to. And it really hit us all hard. That experience is what kind of started everything. To set me up what we call long COVID.
I can't even imagine, Roberto, what that must have been like. I'm so sorry for you and everyone that had to go through that. That had to have been incredibly scary and traumatic. You know, before you got COVID, what were your thoughts about potentially getting COVID?
I was terrified. I remember in the hospital, we have this nursing room. I had fellow nurses. Everyone's watching the news, and we're all watching that this disease is wiping people around the world globally. And we said, okay, finally, we were avoiding it, and we didn't think maybe it won't hit New York, it won't hit the U.S., and it eventually did. And we remember one day the director of nursing came up to our unit and told us, guys, you guys are going to be the first COVID unit in the hospital. And all the nurses looked at each other, and we were just frightened and scared. We went to the nursing room afterwards, a few of us, and I could just see nurses starting to cry, and they were so scared of what was coming. And, I was terrified, but for some reason, I knew that my community needed me. I knew that the patients, I became a nurse because I love people. I love to serve others. And so when I was there, I knew the patients needed me. The patients needed the nurses. It was for me and for what we all thought was going to be life and death. We said we knew that if we got this disease, we might end up not living. And it was such a scary idea. We saw it in the news, and we saw how many lives were being taken around the world, in Italy and China. And we said, whoa, this is scary. And so before even we saw it with our own eyes, our minds and our nervous system were terrified. So that was the start of the introduction of COVID period of our life.
Yeah, I mean, it was terrifying for most of us who weren't working in the hospitals. I can't even begin to imagine what that was like. I was scared to walk out my front door. The whole world was scary, and I didn't even have to go near people, never mind being told that I was now going to be some COVID unit where all the COVID people were going to be coming to me. I can't even begin to imagine. An important part to share, because I think it sounds like it impacted, your, understandably, what it was like for you when you did get COVID. So how did that happen, and what did that look like for you?
I ended up getting COVID that December. I actually was working in the hospital, and I got a really severe fever, body aches, and chills. And I told my nurse colleague, I said, I think I have a fever. I was like, I need to check my temperature. She checks it for me, and she says, you have really bad fever. It was a 102.6. She's like, you need to go now. Like, get off the unit. We think you have COVID. And I was at the time still working on a COVID unit. And I said, oh God. I was like, and I kind of got away with it for a long time. You think about March, which was the worst months, right? March, April, May, June. And, it kind of didn't go away, but it wasn't as bad the other months. And so this is December. And, I thought I didn't get it. I was like, I'm good. I got away from it. And no, so December I ended up getting it. I was terrified. And so then I call my wife and I tell my wife, babe, I'm going to the hotel. I think I have COVID. I got to get tested. She's like, okay, I'm going to pack you a luggage. Come pick it up. It'll be in front of the house. And so I went to the house, picked it up, went to the hotel. And for the next 10 days, I had a fever that would not go away. It was 10 relentless days. And I remember thinking to myself and talking to my wife, babe, this thing is trying to kill me. I was like, the fever does not, I'm taking all the medications I can. And I'm like, it's barely touching the fever. I feel horrible. And, I said, I was trying not to go to the hospital because I knew what was at the hospital. So my idea of what happens to COVID patients in the hospital was not a good one because I took care of them and I kind of knew what was going that path. And I was like, I don't want to go down that path. What ended up happening is that I did stay away from it for as much as I can for 10 days. Eventually now I started having trouble breathing. And so it did start hitting my lungs. And that's when I called my wife and I said, you got to call the ambulance. I got to get picked up. I'm not getting better. It's like, I'm hoping I could kind of get better at home. And so now at this point, I was already isolated at the house. I moved from the hotel to the house. I was isolated in the basement in the house. And so they call the ambulance and they pick me up and they put oxygen on me. I'm checking my oxygenation at home. It's dropping. It's really low. They take me to the hospital. And at this point, I was scared out of my mind. I knew a lot of nurses. They took me to the hospital that I work at. So I knew a lot of the nurses and doctors. And I remember asking the doctor, I said, Doc, and I remember this doctor, worked with this doctor. And I said, Doc, tell me what's going on. Tell me. I was like, Doc, am I going to make it? And he's like, you're going to be all right. And I was like, Doc, just be honest with me. If I start getting bad, just let me know. And, the doctor's trying to calm me down. He's trying to be positive. But at the same time, I knew that as a nurse and as working in the healthcare team, I know what we told our patients. We try to keep them optimistic. And a lot of our patients, despite the hard work that we did and despite being super optimistic and trying to put a smile on their face, and we saw what was the outcome of it. We saw how terrifying it was. So at that point, I was like, I thought I wasn't going to make it out the hospital. I said, so I kind of make my pieces. I do my prayers. I tell my wife, I love you. I tell everybody, look, I'm not going to be on the phone too much. My lungs started getting worse. I think they did a CAT scan and they said, your lungs are not looking good. So they put me on all these medications and man, I really was just scared. I got to be honest with you, Raelan. I was just terrified. I said, and I would be laying down in bed and I had so much trouble breathing, just laying down. And the doctor would, they would make sure I had all these oxygen on. And I remember a nurse and a doctor came in and they said, just in case, we're not saying that you're going to get worse, but how far along, I was already in the ICU. So my heart rate was really bad. It would drop to 20 beats per minute. And they were getting a little worried. They weren't sure why. And they were giving me some emergency medications. In my head, I'm like, I'm not making it out. So you can imagine my mind is on overdrive. I'm not making it out of this hospital. My wife did my prayers. I told my wife, I love you. Just be positive, but I don't know what's going to happen. Doctor and nurse come in, tell me how much further do you want to be ventilated? If it comes down to it, you're a young guy. When I had that conversation, I was like, I know what happens when you're ventilated. I've seen many patients be ventilated and I never saw a very good outcome. And I said, Doc, I don't want to be vented. I want to be on the oxygen, but I don't want to be ventilated. If it comes down to that, just don't do that to me. And so he understood. The nurse, as a witness, understood as well. And I started recovering. So after I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and that's when I got discharged. So that experience of being in the hospital was itself very traumatizing. That was just a really tough experience for me.
Wow, Roberto, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That sounds so scary for you, for your wife, for everyone in your life. So you get out of the hospital, you're feeling a bit better, but were you feeling 100% or what was that like?
Yeah, so I left the hospital and I was really weak. For 2 weeks in the hospital, I said, I'm thinking to myself, why am I having trouble walking? I should be a little stronger than this. And if my body felt like I was in the hospital for 2 months and I had to be wheelchaired out of the hospital, I couldn't really even get to the car. I needed someone to kind of push me into the car, kind of settle me in. And this was very not like me. And, for 3 months, about 3 months, I was extremely weak. And being the type A personality that I am, like most of us are, I went on overdrive and I said, I gotta figure this out. And I just started pushing myself and I said, I gotta recover. Maybe I'm not walking enough. Maybe I'm not, I'm not doing enough exercise. Maybe I have to do more to get better. So I started doing that. But I noticed that something was wrong. Why is it that 1 month passed by, I'm still being on a wheelchair? Why is that 2 months passed by and I'm still in a wheelchair? 3 months and I'm having trouble doing the simplest exercise. My wife is kind of doing PT with me at home. And I'm like, babe, this is not normal. And she's like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. And I went on overdrive, went to my doctor. I was extremely fortunate to have an amazing primary care. He didn't know what was going on. He said, I think you have something called Long Covid. People are leaving the hospital with these issues. He said there's no cure that he knows of, but he told me, he hugged me. And I remember I was like crying to him. I was like, Doc, I don't know what's going on. And he had so much empathy for me. And he said, you got to take care of yourself. And he said, something's wrong. You're not making this up in your head. And that was extremely important because, I wasn't sure. I was like, is this all in my mind? Am I making this up? Like, what's going on? They did the blood work, came back normal. And I went to a cardiologist. They did an ultrasound of the heart. Everything's normal. I went to a neurologist. They did a MRI of the brain with contrast, and he told me everything's normal. And meanwhile, I'm extremely fatigued, extremely weak. I'm always shaking, so I have this shakiness on my hands at 24/7. I'm always shaking. I'm not cold, but it looks like I'm shivering. I'm always shaking, no matter what. After 3 months, I had trouble digesting food. I had to go to a gastroenterologist, and he told me start on a puree diet and kind of work your way up. And I was just having so much trouble digesting simple foods. And I was at a point, my wife was just making me juices and smoothies, and everything had to be pureed for me to digest things without pain. So this was another issue that kind of rose was in the middle of the night, I would have nightmares of me being in the hospital and of past experiences of being a nurse working with my patients. And so I never had this before I got sick. So this is when I had to go see a psychiatrist. And, he diagnosed me and said, you have some severe PTSD. He's like, all these nightmares you're having, you're sleeping 3 hours a night at max. I remember waking up terrified, fully scared. And my nervous system was 100%, and I could not go back to sleep. No matter how tired, weeks on end of getting 2 to 3 hours of sleep every night, I did not want to. My mind did not want to. My body was probably exhausted, but my mind would not shut off. And he had to give me some strong medications, and it helped me. But this is where I had this cluster of physical symptoms. I started to have these PTSD, and I just didn't know what to do, and no one really had an answer for me. I started going to these doctors, and I work with doctors. I love the doctors. I understand the limitations of Western medicine, but at the same time, I work with these great people that they really want the best for their patients, but they just didn't know what to do. They were ignorant. There wasn't enough research. There wasn't enough patients. They just were clueless. And as much as they wanted answers and I wanted answers, I knew that it wasn't their fault. So, I knew not to blame them. And I had doctor friends I would call, and I was so upset. I was like, well, what's going on with me? And I was on disability for 6 months, and it was expected for me to go back to work, but I had all these symptoms. How could I go back to work with all these symptoms? So I couldn't. So I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't recovering as fast as I wanted, or recover, period. And that was kind of my journey into that. And then that's when I had to continue looking for more answers.
I'm curious as you're telling the story, because I can't remember exactly when, I started hearing about long COVID probably earlier than most people, because I'm fairly tapped into the ME-CFS community, which is, as we now know, some decent amount of overlap there.
Yep.
But when I first started hearing about it and even interviewing people with long COVID, when I would talk to my friends and family, they had never heard of it. Now everyone seems to know what it is. But at this time, when you're going through this, was this a thing that people were were people talking about long COVID? Were you part of communities, with other people that had it, or was it still no one knew?
So in my close community, the people I worked with were not aware. the doctors, they knew that patients were leaving with more problems, with lingering effects of COVID. So they knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what it was. I think they knew it wasn't called long COVID. I think it was long haulers or they had these different names. But the doctors I worked with, they said, you're not the first patient. We're having tons of patients coming in. And I mean, from the cardiologist to neurologist to my primary care, they were all saying the same thing, but they just didn't know. And I was not part of any long COVID community. I wasn't sure what that even was. I didn't even hear about that community yet. After several months later, then I started doing more research, and then that's when I found that community.
Yeah, I just imagine that would add to the scariness of it. I mean, it's going to be scary at any time, but at least now, people are aware of it. There are people who are recovering. We can look at different things that work for different people, but then it doesn't sound like you had any of that, which would make it, I would think, all the more scary.
Yeah, there was no hope. There was no this was going to be, there's a cure for this, or there's a resolve to these issues.
Like, hang in there, you'll get there. Like, no one was saying that. They're just like, eh.
No. My doctor was like, he didn't understand what was going on, my primary care. And he's like, I think you need to go see a psychiatrist. You're having these nightmares. And he's like, maybe it's depression, maybe it's anxiety. But he's like, but these physical symptoms are real. He's like, he didn't underestimate those symptoms. He was like, something's wrong. He's like, I think you need to see a psychiatrist. But he just wasn't sure either. He's like, but he told me a lot of my patients are having these problems. It's not just you. He's like, we need more time. He kept saying that we need more time. He's like, I think with more time, you're going to get better. That wasn't necessarily the case.
But eventually you did start to turn this around. So how did you get on the path to that?
So just like all of us, all our recoveries, right? We go to YouTube med school. Right?
Dr. Raelan. Just kidding. Not a doctor. Not a doctor. Not professional advice. Nobody sue me. YouTube, don't shut me down.
Don't sue. Yeah. So right. We all turned, especially us type A personalities. And I went to YouTube University and YouTube med school, and I started looking up everything about COVID. And very quickly I found this long COVID diagnosis, long haulers. And I started looking up interviews of doctors, interviews of patients. And to be honest, most of them were not positive. Some of them said some of them got better. Some of them said, most of them were saying they sort of recovered, but they weren't fully recovered. And, but they've gotten a lot better from where they were. And I was in a bad place. I was still at that point. I think I had some time there. I think I wasn't bedridden. I was home ridden, right? I was at home, housebound. I really couldn't leave the house. I couldn't really do much. So at this point, I just want my life back. I was like, even if I can have a quarter of my life back, if I can just walk outside and not, have that post-exertional malaise and fall apart for a week, I'd be excited. If I could just walk to the mall and walk around and do some food shopping, that'd be great. And so I started looking up on YouTube. Come on, I got to find somebody. And I went full throttle looking for everything. And so I tried to go back to work after a year. I couldn't go back. I went for 2 days and I pretty much fell apart. I actually had to quit. I was working a high-stress, hospital job. I couldn't go back. For several months, I was on YouTube med school, and I was trying to find a solution. And it's been months and months, and nothing really helped. I found there was a pivotal moment that kind of changed everything. There was a thumbnail, and it said long COVID, and it said type A personality and plus past trauma. And I said, okay, and that's weird. I'm type A and I had trauma before I got this with COVID. And I said, okay, yeah, maybe I'll click it. And I clicked it, and it was a psychologist talking about how most people that ended up with long COVID had big things in common. They had a past trauma before getting sick, right? Whichever virus they received or they got, they had some sort of past trauma, whatever that was. And then they were also very driven personality types. And so I said, wow. And then she explained something that changed my life. And it was called Polyvagal theory. I said, oh, this polyvagal. So I started really digging deep. And what is this polyvagal theory? No one told me about it. But she started talking about it and how it kind of explained a lot of the symptoms that I had. It's the only thing, after watching all these doctors on YouTube and patients on YouTube, it's the only thing that kind of made sense and really explained everything I was going through. And so I started digging into polyvagal and the doctor who discovered it and what it meant, and kind of digging into that. And that was really what kind of changed everything. Because then I said, okay, to me, this makes sense. this polyvagal theory of the nervous system, and because it wasn't my thoughts, because I would try to be positive. You know, I did talk therapy. I mean, I did tons of things in this time frame. By the time I saw this video, it was probably a year and a half since I got discharged from the hospital. So it was a long time. So a year and a half that I was already discharged. I was still trying. I was working 1 day a week, and I was really struggling. And I found this video, and I said, and I tried everything. Raelan, I tried everything. I've done some, brain therapy. I've done talk therapy. I've done cognitive behavioral therapy. I did EMDR, which really helped with my PTSD, but it did not help with any of my physical symptoms. So that was kind of weird. I was able to get better sleep, but my physical symptoms were not gone. EMDR therapy, I think it's called the EMDR. Ooh.
Well, we'll look it up and I'll link it in the video description for people who want to learn more, like
Thank
myself.
You. Thank you. It's extreme. And I looked all types of therapy, and for people suffering from PTSD, EMDR is one of the very good therapies, and you can do it at home. You could do it with a therapist. You could do it at home. I was low on funds because I wasn't working at this point. So it's pretty much, just kind of to explain it, it's very simple. It's a therapy where you follow on a screen a ball. It's a ball that goes back and forth. And so your brain, when the eyes are going back and forth, your brain thinks it's safe. So when you're walking in, this is the argument for EMDR. When you're walking in nature, your eyes naturally go back and forth, and it believes everything is calm and safe. You're in a safe environment. So with EMDR, you follow this ball back and forth while slowly bringing up memories of that trauma that triggers that PTSD. While doing the ball back and forth, you just have this calmness. And anytime you bring that memory back up, it doesn't trigger you as much. And if you do it more and more, it doesn't trigger you. And so it really, anybody suffering from PTSD, please talk to a therapist, talk to your doctor about it, see if it fits for you. But for me, it was great. I talked to a therapist about it. He said I could do it at home. So I started doing it at home, and it helped me with my PTSD tremendously. We know as Long Covid or, ME CFS, we have all these physical symptoms. There's still more to the puzzle. That's when I started doing this polyvagal research. And I started doing, once I understood it, it made sense that the nervous system is kind of divided in three, not in two, in this fight or flight, and it has this freeze. And I was like, oh, this freeze makes sense because I'm so fatigued. I can't move. Every time I try to, my body shuts down. And so what I did is I did these exercises, and I went on Reddit and I went on YouTube of people, polyvagal, and what exercises they did to better themselves. And so I started doing yoga. I started doing breathing exercises. And I did it before, but I didn't do it with the understanding of polyvagal. I said, oh, I'm just doing yoga. I'm just trying to stretch on the floor. And I'm like, oh, what is this? And I'll try to do breathing. And I'm like, I can't. My mind is going too much. I would do brain therapy. I did the Gupta program. And I'm like, it's too long. It's too much. It just doesn't make sense. Understood the polyvagal. I said, okay, I need to calm down. I need to relax this body and this nervous system. And so that's when I started doing the breathing exercises with that intention and understanding. That's when I started doing yoga. I started doing laughing yoga, which was tremendous. It was really wild to be laughing in the middle of my room, in the middle of the house, but it worked. And I've tried supplements. I've done a million things. Doing this after a few days of doing these exercises, I started to feel better. Not only was I feeling better, because I've done things in the past and I felt better for a day, but then the next day it was worse, so I just felt bad again. This time it was gradual improvement. And that was huge, because for a year and a half since I was sick, I couldn't do anything that gave me gradual improvement. So my symptoms never really improved. It would improve for 1 day, the next day I'd be worse. It would improve for 2 days, and then a week I'd be bedridden. This was the only thing that I did the first week, and each day I felt a little better. And then this is the first time my brain fog disappeared. It disappeared for a few hours, then would come back. And I said, whoa. I was like, something is going on. I said, my brain fog left. I could think clearly for 2 hours. I got excited. I was like, I think this may be working. So I started getting really excited. I was like, I'm onto something here. This has got to be the secret sauce I've been looking for. And so I started doing those exercises. I started to get better.
I'm laughing at it because, it's nice to we like to have a name to attach to things, right? In polyvagal theory, I like that we have this term, because when we just tell people that I was severely sick for a year and a half, but then I did some meditation and yoga and I was better, it sounds a bit, I think, even to ourselves, or like, I feel like this delegitimizes the condition that I had, or it means it wasn't that serious. But understanding the connection with the nervous system and healing and freeze and all of that. I'm a broken record at this point, but I just can't believe how much I'm hearing this in interviews. It's just again and again and again and again and again. It's not everyone, but it's most of them, that people are saying that understanding this piece of it was key for them in finally getting past it.
It was huge. I've listened to the Gupta program, and it was really long. It didn't work for me. I know people that have worked wonderful for. So everyone has to, see what works for them. And the exercises that worked for me may not necessarily work for you. So yoga and breathing was huge for my recovery. But for other people, it may be laughing yoga and singing. It can be playing or dancing with their bodies, dancing to good music and learning to be joyful. Everyone has a different journey. And I remember listening to Gupta explain it, and it just didn't make sense for me. And for some reason, when I understood, and it's what you said, for some reason, when you understand that, when they put it, I'm very scientific, I'm a nurse, we need a diagnosis, an explanation for everything. And so I heard that polyvagal kind of explained in a scientific manner, my brain just understood it a little bit. It just understood it better, and things just clicked. And that understanding, it's the start of allowing yourself to start healing.
Yeah, and I feel like it feeds that whole healing cycle of that whole process, because believing it and understanding it allows you to further calm down and decrease the stress and have faith in what you're doing and that it's actually getting you someplace. So was that it for you? Is this what slowly, fully brought you back to where you are right now?
So I started doing that, and I started getting better. It was a gradual improvement. It was, and after 2.5 months, I felt fully recovered. I started going back to work full time. I got my life back together. I was able to start running, which I never thought I can go back to running. It was incredible. But, getting ready for this interview, I started to examine what are the things that really helped me improve and get better. Because I wanted to deliver value and practical advice for the people out there. I've had people reach out to me through Reddit and through certain forums, and I've tried to, people that really want to know, and I've done my best to educate them and encourage them and listen to them. And one thing I kind of hear over and over again, one thing that what really helped me, it was kind of that personality trait of having this type A personality, being extremely driven. It drives you deeper into sickness. And I really started thinking about, how did I get out of that? I want to kind of tell the audience out there, and one thing that kind of really helped me, and I hope it can help others, is understanding certain beliefs we have about ourselves. And one thing I really lacked before I went into this recovery journey, and I'm a very different person than I was before I got COVID. And I'm a better person now. I really am extremely happy. I would never want to go through this ever again. It's horrendous, but at the same time, I am a better person for it. And I've learned to have something that it's called, and I didn't have it before, and I constantly practice it now, something called self-love. And I think as type A personalities, we tend to not have that self-love. We tend to beat ourselves up. We tend to be super critical of ourselves. We want to do it all. I've spoken on the phone with certain people that are trying to recover and that have long COVID or POTS or ME/CFS. And, I hear them and they sound like me a year ago. Driven, trying to find they'll do everything. They will read all the research. They will, do anything they can. And at the same time, it's extremely hard. But one thing that really helped me was to let go. What happens is that we start putting these expectations on ourselves while we're in our recovery journey. We say, I did an Ironman before, I did a marathon before, and I want to run a marathon. I'm going to do an Ironman. And then you're in bed and you're like, I could barely get out of bed. And you compare yourself to that athlete you were. You compare yourself to that nurse that I was that can work 12 and a half hours, tough shifts. And now I can barely take care of myself. I can barely help my wife with the groceries. I lost my dignity. What's going on here? And I would, it would just depress me. It would make me sad. And so I had to learn to let go I had to let go of all these expectations I had on myself. And there was a big pivot. There was a big fork at the road. I said, Rob, we have two choices here. And you can either, and this was hard. This was after a year and some months. I said, Rob, you're miserable. And it's two things. Either you can choose to be happy, because it looks like this is not changing. You're not getting better, Rob. And I admitted to myself, I kind of gave up. You can either choose to be happy, or you can choose to be miserable for the rest of your life. And you can continue to compare yourself to the person you were, or as miserable as this sound, you can choose to smile and just be happy with what you have now. Oh my God, it was so hard. And I kept fighting that in my head. I said, well, Rob, how can you be happy now? You could barely go to the store. You can barely get up and go to family functions. I would fall asleep. If I would go to my family function, I'd be so fatigued, I would fall asleep on the floor. And I said, but Rob, there's people in the world that have it worse than you. There's people that have gone into car accidents and lost their limbs. There's people in the world that their family member, their loved one has cancer and have passed away. Irreversible. There's people in the world that have cancer and are fighting that. And I said, Rob, you're awake, you're alive. I know this is not ideal, but you're here now. Can you choose to be happy? And I said, the reason I'm not happy is because I have all these expectations. And I said, what, Rob, why do you have to have all these expectations of yourself? Why can't you love yourself for who you are now? And that reflection was extremely hard. It didn't happen overnight. And then I had to say, you know what, Rob? I got to choose to be happy. I let go of all these expectations. I said, Rob, you're not going to be an athlete anymore, and that's okay. I was like, that's all right. I have a great life, have an amazing wife, have amazing parents, have amazing friends. Rob, you can walk. Let's do it, baby. I was like, I got this. So I started changing my mindset, and I was like, Rob, you have to have more self-love to yourself. And really, that kind of changed my type A personality, where it was driving myself to the ground and really having to prove myself to feel worthy and to feel loved, and letting go of that belief and saying, Rob, you are lovable. You are worthy. You are amazing. You don't have to measure yourself on how much you can run or how much you can do today. That's not what it's about. It's, can you have a smile today? Can you feel joyful today? Yeah, I can. And so I read a book. I recommend this book for everybody. It's called The Self-Love Experiment by Shannon Kaiser or Kaiser. I don't know if I'm misreading that. And it really helped me. I read this within a year, and I just didn't know. I didn't know if this would affect me. I was just bored. I was reading it, and I had it on Audible, and I was just like sleeping to it. I was so fatigued, but I was getting some points to it. And there was another book. I think I looked up, books for people with diseases or something like that. I was like, someone's had to write a book that's gone through worse things than me. And I want to learn from that person. How are they coping with this? Right? Because they have to be. So then I looked up and I found a book called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do by Amy Morin. And let me tell you, those two books absolutely changed my life. So with understanding polyvagal and doing those exercises, the breathing exercises, the yoga, learning to have joy in my life, learning to experience joy and happiness without having to earn it was huge for me. Learning to, socializing, scheduling social time in my calendar with people I felt super comfortable with and people I loved was a huge part of my recovery. I think that's a big part. I hear a lot of the people that I talk to that are trying to recover, I hear that they're always in a rush. They have to work harder. They have to push themselves even more. And I think something that really drives that is this lack of self-love for whatever reason. I really don't want to get into it, but for whatever reason, through the way we were raised, we really lack the self-love. And having self-love is being generous with yourself, being gentle with yourself, being patient with yourself. I would never talk to myself the way I used to talk to my best friend. I was always very harsh and very got to get stuff done. Like, there is no breaks. We got to keep moving. And so that was pivotal in my recovery in my journey, and learning to love myself.
I'm just nodding along because, again, so much of what you say resonates. And then also, again, what I'm hearing from so many people lately, I've been reading about how many of us in our generation and, close by generations were brought up, in very well-meaning families that rewarded getting A's, that rewarded, all these things, that bragged to their friends about their daughter, the honor student, or their son, the captain of the football team. And we start really internalizing this achievement and that being something that we're valued for. And it's just, it's a complex thing. There's a lot of things leading into it, but that self-compassion piece is so important. And I love that I'm hearing about it from both men and women. And some men, like I interviewed, I don't know if you saw this guy named Nick Koutsas, who's over in Australia.
I did. I saw a little bit of it. I did.
Yeah, for him, he's like, self-compassion was a huge, and he's like, I'm a blokey bloke. He's like, I think I had to Google self-compassion. He's like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, I don't know what emotions are. And he's like, but then I realized how hard my life had been driving myself. He's like, I push myself so hard when I'm working. I don't even allow myself to take bathroom breaks. He's like, no, work harder, suck it up. Like, just, we don't even hear the messages that we're telling ourselves and the way that we're treating ourselves and how hard we are on ourselves. So I think that's brilliant.
That's huge.
Yeah. But I don't think I've had anyone explain it as well as you just did. So thank you.
I try. I'm trying all this research, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, so much. I don't know I know you're a nurse, you have your profession, but I really feel like you could do this for a living. Like you are meant to do this. You are so good at explaining this. You are so good at breaking things down and doing it with so much empathy and compassion and humility. I really think you're amazing. And I so much appreciate you doing this today. Thank you so much. Any last messages you want to share before we finish up?
One thing I have for anybody watching this, I know that if you're probably watching this, I know you're going through a hard time. I know that you want to give up. I know that your family probably doesn't understand. And even if they are empathetic, they just don't understand because they just never gone through it. So anybody out there that's going through this, either long COVID, CFS, all these different diseases that are very similar, please don't give up. And sometimes I used to watch these interviews and I would think this is fake. I was like, there's no way this is possible. How is it that these people are recovered and, I could barely walk and I've tried everything. And so one message I have for everybody out there is please don't give up. Keep fighting, and I know this sounds weird, but you gotta let go. You gotta let go of these expectations of yourself. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. Have that self-compassion, learn to love yourself where you are, and you are worth everything. You don't need anybody else telling you you're worthy. You are worthy for being human. You are amazing. You are worth living a beautiful, amazing life. I've had a really quick recovery within 2.5 months, 3 months. I'm fully recovered. Just thinking about this interview, it was hard thinking back and I couldn't believe I experienced what I did. But you know what? Now my life is completely different for the better. I know it hurts. I know it's not easy, but just please reach out. Don't give up. Don't give up. That's my message for everybody listening to this. Just don't give up.
Amazing. I could not even come close to having said that better myself. Thank you for that. And for those of you watching, we'd love to hear in the comments, what's been working for you? That's what this is all about. Just getting information out, getting stories out. So, if you're facing long COVID or ME/CFS or something, similar, please let us know in the comments what's been helpful for you. And let's share those resources. I just find this so amazing. It's so unfortunate that, a lot of the doctors and medical community just don't know what to do with this and really can't help us. But we're all coming together and helping each other, which I think is a beautiful thing. So thank you again, Rob. Thank you again to those of you watching. Big hugs to you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see you in the next one.